Hello, and welcome to a very special episode of Hydra's Den. I'm your host, Hydra, and today I will be joined by guests from the Discord as our other co-hosts are off doing their own thing. So, today I'm going to be covering some very special topic, which is what is GOPD? GOPD being a homebrew game system that I created a while back in order to find a way to entertain my players when we didn't have a full group. GOPD is inspired. It was inspired by some of the more classic creature feature movies of the '90s, including things like Predator, Alien, and Aliens. Some of the more cheesy stuff like Anaconda or, God, I said The Thing, but I'd say The Thing, but The Thing is not a bad movie. The Thing's a great movie. And also inspired by the more recent video games like XCOM and the more recent movies like Men in Black. Actually, that's not even recent at all. That's like 10 years now. So, this is my second attempt at recording this. We had a little mic problem earlier, and hopefully that's gone. Right now in the recording room with me is Clonery. He's helping me out a bit with writing out some of this and getting it all codified, and I greatly appreciate his help. So once again, what is GOPD? GOPD, it stands for the Global Organization for Paranormal Defense. I'm going to just switch over to Paint here. Don't worry if you're just listening to this in podcast form. Anything that I'm going to be putting on Paint or whatever is going to be something that is, just for anyone who wants to go back and look as a memory aid or whatever. This system, as I said before, was set up to be with a few things in mind. The first one being that this is a system set up to be easy to make games for, easy to make characters for, and easy to roll out if you don't have any other ideas. A lot of these missions that I go through are going to be ripped off of classic movies, or they're going to be based on something I came up with on a whim. A lot of it is free form, and while there is some mechanical stuff for those more mechanically inclined, a lot of this is going to be reliant on a player's ability to think their way out of situations, be cunning, be aware of things around them, and just generally give them the freedom to play however they want. So, it's Global Organization for Paranormal Defense. So this is also inspired by comics such as BPRD or Hellboy. If you've ever seen those, you'll see the inspirations very quickly. What I was attempting to do here is make something where I could have a high level of danger whenever I needed to. So players, if they will lose characters. Players' characters will get maimed, torn apart, and what have you. But because it wasn't that hard to make one, nothing is lost as a result of losing it. Other than that, it's going to be a much harder mission, and typically when one guy dies, then the whole mission starts falling apart. If you had not no stranger to this channel and you've been listening to a few of the other episodes, you may have actually seen me run a GOPD session already. That's actually why I'm doing this now, is in preparation for Halloween. Maybe someone else out there can put together their very own GOPD session. So, with the sort of name out of the way, I was going to go into mechanics first, but let's go into a bit of let's start on mechanics, because mechanics honestly are probably the best way to start with this, seeing as it is going to be the bread and butter for any potential DM. So the mechanics are based on a D20 system. Now, if you've ever played D&D 3.5, if you've ever played D20 Modern, if you've ever played Mutants and Masterminds, there's quite a few actually out there, quite a few games that were of that generation, I'll say, that are inspired by this. And the way a D20 system works is typically, in order to do anything, players will roll a D20, so a 20-sided die. They will add some sort of modifier, and they will have to try and overcome a DC, or difficulty class. The difficulty class will typically be some number that you assign beforehand that represents the challenge of a task. So, for example, if the DC of that task is 10, then your players will roll a D20, 20-sided die, add the modifier, whatever relevant modifiers they have for that task, and then the result, if it is greater than 10, then they succeed in that task. I've heard that in 5e they have a lot of situational bonuses and stuff like that, and that is definitely something that I have in mind here, where it's something to keep in mind when you are playing as a DM to adjust your difficulty class or your difficulty check in regards to things that the players do. It's just going to be something that you're going to play with, and you'll figure out your own way. In general, though, just remember that without considering modifiers, something like a difficulty check of 10 is a 50% chance of success. And usually I start at 10% at DC 10 because that beginning one is going to very quickly going to be sort of altered. That the sort of the 50% chance is going to be altered by the fact that some of these modifiers can be as high as 10, which would mean that they would automatically be completing that challenge if it was DC of 10 as well. So, as I said before, the general system is going to be D20 plus modifier. If it's equal to or greater than the check, then you win. It's something you're gonna have to keep in mind. So, for an example, if you are making an, I don't know, let's say an athletics check, your character is trying to do something with athletics, with that, I don't know, they're trying to climb a tree while under duress. Then it would be a D20 plus whatever their athletics modifier is, and you're the DM in this case, the guy, whoever is listening to this, I assume, is going to set up some sort of difficulty check for that, and then if you make that roll, you successfully climb the tree. If you don't, perhaps you fumble a bit, perhaps you're slowed down, perhaps the monster that's chasing after you catches you. Depends on the DM, depends on the situation. Now, there's a few golden rules I'd like to go over right now. I just remembered that are super important for GOPD. Actually, I think there might just be one, and it is, yep, there is only one. The golden rule of GOPD is Satan cannot be beaten with a 9mm. Now, what does that mean? That means when I used to play, when I play something like D&D 3.5, and you get into characters like Asmodeus or Orcus or any of the gods, there's this big problem I have, which is that these characters have a health bar, which means if a peasant with a knife were to walk up to this guy and stab him for 1 damage, and the enemy never actually fought back, the peasant would eventually win. They could just keep stabbing him all day and all night, and those 1 damages would eventually add up to however much health that big god has, and eventually that god would be shanked to death by a peasant with a knife. And that's ridiculous to me. So when I was making this system, one of the biggest rules I thought of was Satan will never be defeated with a 9mm. So it doesn't matter if your players get that amazing godlike natural 20, maybe they get all the best checks in the world, all of the best rolls. If that is just a regular 9mm pistol and they are shooting Satan, Satan doesn't care. Satan's going to slap that gun out of their hand, and then he's going to laugh at them and set them on fire or drag them to hell or whatever Satan does. What I'm trying to say here is that the golden rule is that if you don't have enough firepower to deal with something, it doesn't matter what you roll. It doesn't matter. There's no sort of mechanical, you ding his health even though your weapon doesn't make sense that your weapon would work. If that makes sense at all, the idea that I'm trying to say is that use the appropriate weapon. If your pistol is not just a regular pistol, but is a holy pistol blessed by the Pope himself and wielded by Kung Fu Action Jesus back from the grave, round 2 to give the slam down to Satan, that pistol is going to suddenly start doing a lot more because, it's a holy pistol and maybe it's shooting anti-demon bullets that Satan really doesn't like. So when you start adding modifiers like that, then suddenly you're going to have a lot better chance. But as a rule, Satan is not defeated by a 9mm. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's continue into our mechanics. As I said, since the main mechanic is going to be D20 plus modifier equals DC, the most important thing that your players can really control is that modifier. The rest of it is, of course, going to be left up to chance and the whims of the DM and whatever sort of situational stuff you set up. Actually, quick note, if you as a DM, if you see your players doing something, remember to adjust DC your difficulty checks based on what your players are doing. If your players are trying to swim across a river, or they're trying to swim to the bottom of a lake, by themselves, maybe that's an athletics check, and that might be a pretty hard athletics check. If they're trying to swim to the bottom of the lake, however, with full swimming gear, full scuba gear, that check's going to be a lot easier. You're going to lower the DC a lot. So keep in mind whatever your players are doing and those types of situational things to lower it. On the other hand, if that player has a broken leg, you're going to increase the DC instead of lowering it. So just situational things to keep in mind. Now, if we look at our little GOPD sheet here, so once again, for you guys listening, don't worry. I'll explain everything that I'm going through here. And you really don't need this. In fact, anyone looking at this can see that I just stole a Mutants and Masterminds sheet. That's something that also is going to come up a lot, is the fact that I stole most of my mechanics here. Or let me rephrase that. I saw mechanics that were in other systems that I thought, these are nice mechanics. And I thought, let's coalesce and get together the best of those mechanics. Stealing is the wrong word. It is being inspired by them. So, because, I mean, honestly, a lot of these art mechanics aren't even unique to this system. In this case, what I did here was I just pulled up a character sheet to use, and what I found was a Mutants and Masterminds 3.5 edition. You don't need this. Anything that's highlighted in yellow here, you probably aren't going to need or use. Anyways, really, you can do this all in a notepad, and I do a lot. And so let's go into our character stuff. So, characters that your players are going to be playing. Your characters are members of this organization called GOPD, Global Organization for Paranormal Defense. They are going to be exploring supernatural situations. They might deal with aliens or ghosts, ghouls, monsters, ancient curses, whatever you can think of and whatever you feel like using. So how they get their modifiers in order to, do stuff is going to be by these stats here. So we have of this sheet, the only things you really need to keep in mind are these 7 stats: strength, agility, fighting, awareness, stamina, dexterity, and intellect, which I would call the basic stats, the base stats of a person. Then we have the defense rolls, the defense saves, which are dodge, parry, fortitude, toughness, and will. And then on the second page we have 12 skills, which are athletics, deception, expertise, insight, intimidation, investigation, perception, persuasion, stealth, technology, treatment, and vehicles. Anything else on this page, honestly, probably isn't important. So in order to figure out what your characters have, I added a bit of nice little bit of character building in terms of some mechanical dice rolling here, just because some people like that, and I wanted to have just enough crunch for them. So we start with our base stats, and a lot of what we get is going to be based on those. Our base stats are going to be assigned by rolling d6s, in this case 7 of them, so 6-sided dice, 7 rolls of a 6-sided die, and each roll is going to represent one of these stats in order. So your first roll is your strength, your second roll is your agility, your third roll is your fighting, your fourth roll is awareness, stamina, dexterity, intellect. So once you do that, what I do is I say to the players that they can trade any 2 of those stats. So let's just say they get low roll in stamina and a high roll in intellect, but they want more stamina, and they can, trade the 2. And I let them just do that one swap. You can choose that if you want. You can be more flexible if you want. It's up to you, really. But let's go over what each of those stats are. So strength represents a person's physical ability, is their upper body strength. You see this stat all the time in all sorts of other systems. If you don't know what this stat means, I'm sorry. Check your dictionary, because strength means exactly what you probably think it does. It is muscle. So strength is going to govern your ability to fight in close quarters, is going to govern things like if a player wants to be pushing around something or lift something that's really heavy, you might ask for their strength. Strength is also going to govern your toughness, which we'll go over in a little bit, which is what I refer to as the person's meat. It is their ability to not die. It is their ability to have a physical build. It's an important stat. it's a very useful stat, especially if you're the type who decides I want to grab my katana and go in with Glorious Nippon Steel. Some systems would use dexterity instead, but some systems aren't my system. It will make sense, a lot more sense as we go, though. So the next stat is agility, where strength is your just raw muscle. Agility represents your ability to, where strength represents upper body, agility represents lower body. Although, in some extent, it might represent your arms as well, but it's more so your ability to run, leap, dodge, acrobatics, any sort of fancy footwork, your ability to sprint into or away from danger. This stat mainly covers your agility, and I think that's about it, really. There's going to be situational uses for it, of course. As a DM, you might ask them to roll agility if they perhaps are going to be leaping from pillar to pillar, as I don't know, columns or as the temple that they're in is collapsing around them, or perhaps you might ask for it in terms of their ability to, I don't know, do a fancy dance. Whatever it is, agility is definitely not the most important one. It also does actually affect one of the skills that I'm going to be talking about a bit later, which is stealth. So your ability to sneak around all like a ninja, which makes sense, because fancy footwork. I feel like I am missing something that I was about to mention, and then I completely blanked and forgot. Right. So for each of these people, just a little bit of lore stuff. I'll give more of the lore stuff later. But if in terms of a stat, what each of these stats looks like on a person, the GOPD as an organization is this covert Illuminati organization that I'll go into a bit later, but they pull from the best of the best from around the world. In terms of stats, don't let your players believe that just because they get a 1 in a stat that they are terrible and they are garbage at that stat. A 1, for at least in my book, represents average in a stat. A 6 represents like nearing on basically on top physical condition of that stat. Someone who is at the top, who has a 6 in strength, is likely someone who is like Arnold Schwarzenegger build, or someone who does a ton of steroids, or one of those big, huge, chunky guys who pulls around airplanes. Okay, that's probably going to be a little higher, but you get the idea. Is that a 6 does represent the absolute pinnacle of it, but don't let your players feel bad because they have a 1. I have seen people do insane stuff with a 1s in their stats, like actually just crazy stuff. A lot of it is going to depend on how your players play more than the stat itself. Although there's one stat that I will give the exception for that, and that stat is coming up in a little bit. Now our next stat is fighting. Fighting represents a character's overall combat experience. It is the total sum of their knowledge in terms of beating up and murdering other people. It is a very broad stat in that if you do any sort of close range or long range combat, this stat is going to represent your skill, the skill part of that modifier. So, when I was talking about, someone running around with a katana, the reason why it's not dexterity is because it's strength and fighting. So it's your strength of swinging that sword plus your actual skill with swinging that sword. You can have someone who is very strong at swinging swords but is not very good at it, or you can have someone who is very skillful at swinging swords but is not very strong, and they all have similar modifiers because, two ways to go about a similar situation. So fighting also is going to be used in the very rarely used parry stat, defensive skill. I almost never use parry, but I can't bring myself to remove it from the defense rolls. If you feel like you want to use parry, then good on you. It's a pretty straightforward defensive skill, and otherwise fighting is fighting. As dumb as that sounds. Wow, that sounds kind of dumb.
Shouldn't parry be more like towards how the character is? Like you could have the big strong dude that just takes hit after hit after hit, and then you could have this little dude that kind of moves stuff.
Yeah, so a parry, well, parry represents your ability to clash with, to like counter attack on you with a weapon. Effectively, that's what a parry is. So yeah, you can, because strength is going to be used in governing your toughness, which is your ability to take blow after blow, which is exactly what you said. Strength will naturally, someone who has a lot of strength will naturally be someone who is tougher at taking hits, whereas someone who has a lot of fighting will naturally be someone who is better at parrying. So, something to keep in mind for your players. I don't know if that's kind of answers your question.
Yeah, just bringing it up.
Okay, yeah, no, I appreciate it. It's something to if it's something to bring up. If you're a player and you want to parry all the time and you have a high fighting, try it. I mean, if as a DM, if your player asks if they can try it, I mean, what do you got to lose, man? It might be hilarious. It might be amazing. Or if you really just think no, you're dead, then, I mean, at least you can give them the roll. Perhaps you give them a little bit of breathing room before you viciously maul them to death. So, the next stat is the only stat that I believe if it is low, you are in danger. And that is awareness. This stat, or let me rephrase that, not having points in this stat because people thought, I'm fine with having 6s in every other stat. I really want that 6 in strength. I don't actually need awareness, so I'll switch my 6 out of awareness and into strength. This has killed people. This has killed many people. The amount of deaths associated with this stat is startlingly high because awareness represents your ability to be aware of your surroundings. It is your senses. It is your ability to sense things around you. It is directly connected to your perception check, which is one of the most rolled checks when I play in the game. And in my opinion, it should be one of the most rolled checks. It is also connected to your ability to investigate an area, which is to say, investigate a crime scene, look around for stuff. And it is also connected to your will, which is your ability to defend against mental attacks or against horrifying strength in your mind against horrifying situations. It is a very important stat, as you can probably you probably gain that feeling. It's vibe. It's a very important stat. Can't say this enough. Too many people die because of this. Even if you have low awareness, though, you can make up for that a bit in when we get to skills, because there is a part of this that is not just rolling the dice, and that will be when we get to skills. So don't feel bad if you do if your player ends up with a 1 in awareness. You can always make up for it later when we get there. It's just having a nice high awareness is always useful. So next stat, stamina. Stamina, where strength is your... I've heard it described as, I believe it was red muscles versus white muscles or something like that. I don't remember. But the general... Whereas strength would be your body's ability to move things around because you have lots of muscles. Stamina is your ability to last. Another important one because, it represents our natural... one of the most important tools that humans have, which is our ability to keep going and going and going. Stamina will represent a person's ability to endure under stress. It will represent your ability to endure poisoning, to endure internal bleeding, and to, it represents a lot of the meat of your body. I use it in the calculating of your athletics skill. If your athletics is perhaps a sprint, athletics, I will usually use stamina or agility. Really depends on the situation.
You cut out right after poison and then just kind of pop back in.
Okay, I apologize for that. Then if it was right after poison, stamina I'll just go over that again. Stamina represents your ability to withstand poison. Represents your ability to withstand internal bleeding. It represents the meat of your body, your ability to take hits and keep going. And it's going to also be... I typically am also going to use this in athletics. It's going to... it's interchangeable with agility, depends on the situation. Your ability to, climb a knotted rope might be more of a stamina thing, but your ability to quickly go up that ladder might be more of an agility thing. Depends on the DM, depends on the situation. In general, though, stamina is mostly going to be important for the two defensive stats of fortitude and toughness, which we will go over in a bit. Then we have dexterity. Oh, I need some water. Dexterity. This is a person's skill at minute tasks with their hands. If agility is your fancy legwork, dexterity is your fancy handwork. This can be used in picking a lock. This can be used in fixing a watch. This can be used, most importantly, in shooting a gun. If you are doing any sort of ranged attacks, dexterity is very important to you. It is your hand-eye coordination and your skill at manipulating things with your hands. So, very important stat. It doesn't really actually cover any other skills. No, there's no dedicated skills to it, but just because of the fact that it's useful in shooting, it is an important skill to have. Now, intellect, being the last one. Intellect is one's knowledge, one's mental training, and most importantly, one's knowledge of the supernatural. Supernatural is very important in this universe, and if you are a magic user, which we will go into a bit later, this will affect the number of bonus spells you get. We have a bit of that, and this affects your ability to defend against mental attacks or to keep your mind from breaking under strain. Intellect is also used in quite a few skills, including deception, your insight, which is your supernatural knowledge. It is going to be used in, as well, your persuasion, so your ability to convince someone. Once again, situational, though. I have had people convince others with, well, I guess more intimidation type techniques, which is why we also have intimidation. So I guess, yeah, in persuasion is intellect. Technology, which is your ability to work with any sort of basic technology. I put it as a nice general skill so that people wouldn't have to be too much of a specialist, because it shouldn't be something that gets in the way too much. Intellect also governs your treatment, which is your ability to administer first aid and do surgery and stuff like that. And then vehicles, which is your ability to drive around any vehicle you want. So anything from helicopters to tanks to jeeps to submarines. I don't care. It's all under vehicles, because, we just once again, we are trying to make a nice system where you don't have to have 1,000 different stats. We want this to be nice and straightforward, or straightforward enough while still having some crunch. Now, I know there are simpler systems out there. I wanted a system with a little bit of crunch, so yeah, we've got some here. Now, once you have those 7 stats, those 7 stats are going to be used to affect your modifiers. Once again, this is all coming back to the modifier on your D20. Now, the modifier in this case we're going to be talking about here is defensive skills. When someone rolls, when someone gets attacked in some way, typically or has some sort of bad situation, typically they're going to have to roll one of these defensive roll. So they might have to roll a dodge, they might have to roll a parry, a fortitude, a toughness, or a will. Now, what that means is you will take whatever the modifier is on your defensive skill, and you will add, and then you'll roll d20, add your defensive modifier to that d20, and see if you beat the difficulty check, which your DM's going to assign. Kind of going between addressing the DM and the player here, but it's, you guys get it. It's going to be your defense skill is your ability to not suffer some sort of penalty. These are very important, and the way you calculate these is simply by deriving them straight from those base stats. Dodge is the first one, and dodge is your agility. Whatever number that you rolled as your agility, when you rolled that 6-sided die, that's also your dodge. So if you rolled a 4 in agility, you also have a 4 in dodge. Dodging is exactly what it sounds like, and is your ability to leap out of the way of something. I like to use this one if someone needs to dodge something at like that last moment. Something is coming at them, they need to jump out of the way. I'll usually have them roll a dodge check, because it's your ability to avoid some sort of attack. Considering this is typically a more modern setting, GOPD in general, typically people aren't wearing full body armor or expected to tank hits, so dodging is a very important one. As I said, it is Sorry, could have sworn I heard something in the background, but I guess my house is just being haunted as usual. Dodging is your agility, as I said. So, next stat is fighting. I went over this. Sorry, parry. I went over this a little bit before. Parry is just your fighting. Whatever your fighting base stat was, that is also your parry. Parry is your ability to, stop an attack with with some sort of tool, weapon, whatever you have lying around. For players, use this if you want to be fancy. For DMs, I don't know, man. Use it if you want. Fighting is a fairly important skill, and typically people are going to have a fair amount of it. So, if you want them to have that chance to do that, then go for it. A lot of this is going to be, there's not a whole lot of concrete coding for codified rules for how do you deal with a certain situation. A lot of it is going to be situational and up to the DM. So one DM might say roll dodge when that bear tries to maul you. Another DM might just say roll parry. Typically, I would give the players a chance to, either dodge it or parry it, or I would look at the players' skills, defensive skills, and I would look at whichever one is higher, and then tell them to roll that one, because someone who is better at dodging will probably try and dodge. Someone who's better at parrying will try and parry. Also, the fact that it is a bear may mean that dodging is a better option than parrying, because bears are strong. So most of these are going to be pretty straightforward. It's only when we get to the bottom two that they are not. So, fortitude. Fortitude is a body's defense against what I'm going to call the slow killers. The slow killers are things like poison, blood loss, internal bleeding, or anything else related to bodily trauma. Radiation, I don't know, holding your breath, things like that. So fortitude is directly your stamina. Whatever your stamina was, that's also your fortitude. So as I said, stamina is your ability to resist all these things. That's why it's just fortitude. Typically, if someone takes damage, then let's just say that bear hits them, I'm going to have them roll toughness first and then fortitude, because toughness is your ability to sort of resist a hit. And then fortitude for if that hit if they fail at toughness and they're now bleeding, I might have them roll fortitude a few times for internal bleeding and stuff like that. Because honestly, internal bleeding is the nasty slow killer, which just leads us to toughness. Toughness is a very, very important stat. If you notice, there's a number. If you are watching this directly, you'll notice there's a little thing in brackets here next to it. And this is where we kind of, I can zoom in a little to see this. Man, that is a slow zoom. You can see that there's a stat connected to each of these. I'm going to start sort of going off what they say here when I get to toughness and stamina. Sorry, toughness and will, because toughness is going to be equal to your strength plus your stamina. So not just your stamina, it is a combination of both, because it represents a person's, what I refer to as their meat, their physical constitution. It governs their ability to deal with immediate bodily trauma. Stab wounds, slash wounds, getting shot, anything like that. If you've ever seen a game, you'll see me tell people to roll this. It is your ability to take that hit, and you're telling me what kind of damage that person just took. Very important one, because it's a combination of two stats. It is a player's first line of defense against getting hurt. Whereas someone might have to roll toughness once because they got stabbed. Once they fail that toughness roll, the DM's going to get to roll fortitude every occasion that they feel like it, in order to tick off those internal bleeding, or as the internal bleeding gets worse, the person's ability to maintain consciousness. So toughness is that. Typically, just a reminder for DMs, if a person's getting hit by something, typically what I do is toughness, fortitude, which is toughness, the initial damage that the injury is. If the injury is more severe, fortitude, the first fortitude, which is how much internal bleeding are we looking at? What sort of internal issues are we looking at? And then if it's bad, Fortitude again. Are you going to pass out from the shock? Because you just lost a lot of blood. In this way, people bleeding like a stuck pig is actually one of the biggest killers. After failing to notice the evil monster sneaking up on you. And so, very important stat that's going to be rolled a lot. Now, your last one here is will. Will is awareness plus intellect. And will represents someone's state of mind. Will is both your ability to combat mental attacks and your ability to stay sane when you see a friend get ripped in half. So, if players witness something particularly horrifying and gruesome, they may have to, even if the most hardened of people may have to roll a will check if you've just witnessed something absolutely eldritch and horrifying from just that simply defies expectation. It's going to represent someone's ability to not, snap and turn into a gibbering fool. It'll also represent your ability to resist against mental attacks. So, first page out of the way. Once again, to do any of those checks, it would be a d20 plus the modifier. And then if you beat the DC, then you win that check. And you succeed whatever you're doing. For DMs, remember 5 equals easy, 10 equals medium, 15 equals hard, and 20 equals pretty freaking hard. 25 equaling nearly impossibly hard, and 30 equaling actually just impossible. If you give someone a 30, there's almost no way they're going to succeed. There's very few checks that they could succeed on. If the few that they can are things like toughness, will, and combat checks. I could actually, I'll just go over that right now. Let's quickly go over to Paint. And while it's not written here, for any sort of combat rolls are going to be done in 2 ways, which are going to be based on your fighting check. So combat, that's done. Combat rolls are done like this. So for CQC, or melee combat, this can be anything from knife fighting to attacking someone with a cattle prod to any sort of thing in between, or punching someone out. This is equal to your melee combat modifier is equal to your fighting plus your strength. You add that onto a d20 result, and what you get is your melee combat roll. Your ranged combat, so your shooting ability, shooting ability, or ranged combat is going to be equal to your fighting plus your dexterity. So in this way, you can see that in terms of people's combat abilities, they're typically going to be a lot higher than their ability to, dodge something. Because, there's going to be a lot of combat typically if you get all excited about creature feature shootouts like I do. If you've seen any of the previous episodes of GOPD or any of the ones that will follow this, you will see combat comes up a lot. So, with that in mind, let's go back to our PDF. And let's look at the second page. The second page is our skills. There are 12 skills here, and they are only slightly different than the previous stuff. Oh, okay, get that out of the way. Guess I can't manipulate the sheet very much. And these are going to represent your miscellaneous sort of skills. These are things that are going to add flavor to a character, whereas the rest of them are just kind of stat-blocked staples. These are going to be little flavory things that might change someone from a sniper to a medic to a spy to whatever, to an occult enthusiast. So our skills are, once again, athletics, deception, expertise, insight, intimidation, investigation, perception, persuasion, stealth, technology, treatment, and vehicles. So on a notepad here, I actually have saved. Unlike the others, they did not have, the sheet did not come with a natural sort of affinity modifier for these. So the stats that are related to these are as follows. I will put them down right here. Okay, there we go. So, athletics can be your stamina or your agility dependent on the situation. Deception, it can be your intellect. Expertise is going to be, it depends once again. And I'm going to get into that when I get there. Insight is your intellect. Intimidation. There's going to be a few depends here. I know I'm terrible. Investigation is awareness. Perception is awareness. Persuasion is intellect. Stealth is agility. Technology, treatment of vehicles, all intellect. Now, these are going to be a little bit different than the other skills because unlike just raw rolls, you also have ranks for each of these. Okay?
You're starting to cut out.
Oh, sorry. Where did I start cutting out? Or did I just start cutting out?
You're like still cutting out. I can't hear you on the stream.
Okay. Let's see. Let's just kind of, wear this through. Harden against the storm. I just realized that this doesn't actually affect my recording because my recording is on my end. So, I don't really know what to say to that. I guess I should probably just honestly continue the recording on my end because honestly it's being recorded on my end. I would like to keep
if it doesn't affect the recording, keep going.
Yeah, exactly. So might as well keep it coherent for the recording. So unlike the others, we're going to have ranks. So just so that it's not entirely dependent on your rolls, you get 15 points. And the way this works is that for a skill check, unlike the previous checks, a rank skill check is a rank skill modifier. Sorry, a rank skill modifier. So as we said before, any roll is going to be a d20 plus your modifier. The rank skill modifier is going to be a attribute. Sorry, attribute plus your ranks. And so the way this works is you have your attribute, which is whatever I said there before. Let's just say in the case of, let's use vehicles as an example. So in the case of vehicles, it is, God, I cannot spell tonight. So it is going to be your intellect, whatever that may be, plus a number of ranks that you have put into your skill. Now, as I said, you start with 15 points, and the way this works is when a player is making their character, they assign ranks into their skills. You can have up to 5 ranks in any skill, and you have 15 total points worth of ranks to assign. So what I mean by that is, let's just say you wanted to go 4 in athletics. You can go like, you could have 4 ranks in athletics. You could have 3 ranks in insight. You could have 5 ranks in perception. You could have, that's a total of 8. That's a total of 12. And then we could have 3 in technology. So we take those ranks, and if you are asked, let's just say to roll perception, it would be your awareness, whatever your awareness modifier is, plus those 5 ranks, which let's just say your perception is 3, then it would be, sorry, your awareness is 3, then it would be 3 awareness plus 5 ranks in perception to make a total of plus 8. So if I were to roll my perception, then it would be a d20 plus 8, if that makes sense. This is a system that if you're familiar with something like Dungeons & Dragons 3.5, you will remember this as being used in pretty much like 3/4 of all checks. It does appear in other systems, and the general idea here is that it's a little bit of your base stats, and it's a skill. It represents your training in some particular pursuit, so you can add your own sort of artificial thing to it. Some people will just go 5 points in 5 ranks in 3 of those stats. They might spread them out a bit more, but just remember, using this, you can get above the natural cap in any stat of 6 and go a bit higher if you need it. So that's why perception checks will typically, in my games, be a bit higher than 6, because people want to have lots of perception, because when you're about to get ambushed, perception is what determines whether you live or die. So speaking of which, well, it doesn't actually determine whether you live or die. It determines whether you spot your attacker. Much like in real life, those who do not see the tiger coming quickly fall victim to it. So back to our sheet here. let's go through these one by one. Athletics. Athletics is a sort of vague skill. Actually, you know what? Let's just stay on the paint sheet here because on the paint I have my stats and everything open. And it's nice and easy to do it on there. So, athletics, the reason why I use stamina or agility here is because athletics represents your ability to run, it represents your ability to climb, it represents your ability to do any sort of athletics, anything that would require an athletic situation, specifically under duress. So, if someone just needs to sprint, if you guys just need to sprint for miles, and there's no particular like danger, like it's, I don't know, you're sprinting across the British countryside in the mild temperatures of spring and you have plenty of water, so nobody's really, suffering, I wouldn't ask you to roll any sort of check. I might ask you to roll in athletics with stamina as the particular there, but the DC would maybe be 5 to not be gasping for breath and have to stop for a water break or something like that. Remember, these characters are typically going to be well-trained individuals, so save an athletics check for a matter of life and death. Athletics is for that epic leap to get to the chopper when you're leaping off a cliff away from a band of angry tribal men. Or it's going to be your ability to climb up a tree to escape the giant man-eating cobra. Or your ability to, I don't know, it's your ability to do something that would be considered an athletic skill, any sort of physical athletics. Look up your different dictionary definition of athletics if you really need it. But typically, I like to see, I'll see this on snipers and stuff like that. If they find themselves stuck up a tree with something at the base of the tree coming after them, they might need this to leap out of the tree and get the jump on their attacker, or to run away really fast when something notices them shooting and decides that it wants them dead. Otherwise, athletics will not be used all that much. As I said, it depends on your game. So, deception is our next one. Deception is your ability to be a sneaky motherfucker. I should not swear. Oh well. Deception is your ability to deceive, as it sounds. Deception, the way I do deception is, and I believe that every DM playing the system should do this, is deception. When someone's deceiving another NPC, they will typically, they make up a story. If the story is believable enough, I will not ask for them to roll deception because I don't believe a deception roll is necessary. If it is so believable a story, or if the person actively wants to believe it, then there's no reason to roll it. However, if you're trying to convince them of something that's a little bit less believable, I might have them roll a deception roll, and depending on how unbelievable that situation is, the difficulty can rise more and more. It's going to, because, once again, going back to our rule of Satan cannot be defeated with a 9mm, once again, what that golden rule really meant is that there comes a point where mechanics should not interfere with the with the natural state of the world. In the natural state of the world, you can't walk up to a person and tell them, "I am Jesus Christ incarnate. Worship me, ye foolish wenches, and give yourself to me." You can't just walk up to them and, just because you have a high enough deception, pull it off. That if you gave them good evidence of it, if you came down from a mountain with the sun at your back, and these people are already they belong to some neo-Christian cult that believes that Jesus is about to rise again, and you're telling them, "I'm Jesus," and you kind of look like the biblical depiction that they have of Jesus, yeah, your deception roll is going to be a lot easier. But walking up to someone on the street and telling them that, DMs, don't let someone's roles be big enough that they could just talk their way out of any situation. People can be skeptical sometimes, but at the same time, if your player's a real smooth talker, then they may not even need this. Deception is typically going to be used in situations where civilians are involved. It's going to be used in situations where civilians are involved. More Men in Black type situations where the G-men come in to clean up some issue. Expertise is our next skill, and expertise is the wild card skill. I wanted to add a little skill in here for maximum flavoring, where an expertise is the way I refer to it is an expertise is your hobby. And the reason why this depends is if your hobby is locksmithing, your relevant stat's probably going to be dexterity, because it is going to be your ability to open locks by picking them. It is going to be your ability to fix a broken lock. That requires a fine use of your hands. Whereas if your expertise is in geography, your modifier is probably going to be awareness, because it is your ability to naturally recognize certain geological formations, perhaps certain rocks. The argument could even be made that it would be intellect in that situation. I will leave it up to the players and the DMs to decide. As I said, this is a wild card stat. This should be picked typically if you have something very, very particular that you want to do and no other stat really fills it. And otherwise, I would say players should probably leave it alone, and DMs, let your players have it if they want to, but always remind them that if you think you can use a different stat to like cover the same situation, probably use a different stat, because expertise can often be a sort of point sink that the players believe they will use. Like, as I said, the player who goes in with knowledge of ancient historic castles and they go into the middle of New York. It's amusing, but not relevant or useful. And typically you're going to want to prevent your players from doing things, or you're going to want to sort of restrain your players from sinking points into things that have absolutely no impact. Like if let's just say they want that knowledge of ancient historical castles, if you know it's going to have absolutely no impact on the campaign, your particular mission, let them have it for free. Don't make it expertise, because then they're sinking points into something that will not affect the game, and so they're crippling themselves. Just, give them a free. Yes, sure, you have expertise in castles. Take 10 points, take whatever the frig you want. Just leave your points to something more useful. So, insight. Insight is knowledge of the supernatural. This is darker, more occult knowledge. This is your ability to identify alien species on sight. This is your knowledge of which ritual to use to banish a Chinese vampire. This is your knowledge of how to summon a demon. This is your knowledge of how an alien's anatomy works. This is all sorts of darker occult knowledge. It's exactly that. It's your knowledge of the occult and the arcane. You can get away without having this, but I would typically suggest having someone in your, like for players, I'd suggest having someone in your party that has a few points in insight or just naturally has a solid intellect, because sometimes investigating a situation is useful. Insight, for DMs, insight should often be used to either dispense lore to players. You'll have them roll an insight, like just tell them to roll an insight and then dispense the knowledge, or use it as a way for them to investigate something. Perhaps it gives them a clue into how to defeat the monster that is hunting them. So, intimidation's our next one. Intimidation is another depends, because I've seen it is exactly what it sounds like. It is your ability to intimidate someone. Similar to deception in terms of, or persuasion, in that it is a skill for convincing people, but unlike the other two, you can use strength, because you can break a chair and start screaming and tell them that this is going straight down their throat if they don't tell you what you want to know. And I would argue that is a strength roll. You could also do the knife game from Aliens, if you've seen that one, where they stab a knife in between someone's fingers very quickly, and that would be dexterity. Or you could just, explain to them, you can give them an old Hannibal Lecter style lecture about how no one will ever find the body. And that would be more of a intellect, probably. What I'm saying is that it really depends on what the person's doing. This is the stat for the players who like to abuse NPCs in a setting that has civilians, because your players will be committing war crimes. If you have seen my GOPD campaign that took place in the deep south of the United States, you will see some classic NPC abuse. NPC abuse will happen. It is a sad truth. Every day 10 NPCs die because players simply do not care, and 10 more will probably be dying even as I speak. Rest in peace, little NPCs. You will be missed. So war crimes and abuses aside, investigation. Investigation is your ability to investigate a scene. It is your ability to pick up clues. It is the ability to spot particular nuances or little things that you might not otherwise find when you are searching a crime scene or just a place where a disaster has happened. Awareness, it's pretty straightforward. Look up the definition of it if you don't know it. Perception. Perception is your ability to use your five senses. Unlike investigation, which is where you move into a situation and you are investigating something not under duress, not under any sort of danger. Perception is your ability to notice particular things, and most particularly, things that are like bad things. It is your ability to notice an enemy sneaking up on you. It is your ability to smell the gasoline filling the room. It is your ability to feel to touch a door and feel that it is warming up because there's a dragon breathing fire on the other side of this door. It is your ability to notice the subtle movement in a chest of the dead body that is actually still alive, or the shift in the mud as someone's camouflage doesn't quite work perfectly. Perception is a roll or die skill, in my opinion, only because people typically who fail this, I have a classic story of someone going in to investigate a room on an alien infested base, not looking around properly, and getting snatched up by an alien, dragged onto a roof, and torn apart. They did get plenty of other rolls between that, but that first failure of perception, the inability to notice that there was an alien lying in wait, is what started the sort of cascade of failures, which leads to the inevitable, destruction of the person. And that is why perception gets its own stat here, and that is why you can put your up to 5 ranks in it if you need to. Perception saves lives, and perception ends lives. Always remember this. Persuasion. Whereas intimidation and deception are less honest or kind ways of convincing someone, persuasion is more about your ability to convince someone of something, not necessarily using lies, but more just to convince someone of something. A deception is your ability to convince someone that a piece of information is untrue. A persuasion is your ability to convince someone to do something for you. These form the sort of trifecta of social skills. I've been very tempted to combine persuasion and deception together because they often go hand in hand. I might do that honestly at some point, but for now they are two different skills. And once again, persuasion, it's your ability to convince someone to do something for you. Once again, useful in civilian situations, not so useful anywhere else. Stealth, very straightforward, your ability to hide in the shadows. It is your ability to sneak around. It is your ability to do any sort of spy related stuff, and is the only skill here that is dedicated to using agility. Now, let's knock through the rest of these. Technology is your ability to work with technology with basic technology. For these last few, they're pretty broad, and that's on purpose, so that you don't have to have a situation where a player is only knowledgeable in electrical engineering. So sorry, they can't fix the car's engine because it's a different problem. Or sorry, they can't open that lock because they only know how to do computers. Or sorry, they don't know how to fix the helicopter because, once again, they only do computers, or they only do, I don't know. It doesn't matter what it is. Technology is your ability to work with, fix, and manipulate any technology that is native to Earth. Perhaps if it is a very obscure technology, you might increase the difficulty check related to this. The only real difficulty check related to technology is typically going to be that of how obscure or random or not out of the ordinary is this piece of technology. If it is getting an old tank working, your technology roll might be a bit higher, but I'd still let them do the technology roll because, it's just something nice and easy to do. Next up is treatment. Treatment is first aid. If someone has a first aid kit, even if they don't, they could try and treat someone's injuries, or it can also be your medical knowledge of a situation. If you were doing an autopsy on a dead body, treatment might find out some information about that dead body. Use treatment as you need to. use the difficulty checks as you need to. But just remember that in real life, there are no heal spells. There are no way to just patch up someone's healing and have them immediately all fine and ready to go. Even if you shove a whole bunch of bandages in there and gauze and staple that wound shut, if the person suddenly decides to run away from Cerberus, who's trying to drag his soul to hell, that might reopen wounds. So keep in mind, depending on how good the patch job is, that might make it change the DC of later fortitude saves they make as they tear back open their wounds trying to scramble away from danger. And lastly, vehicles. Vehicles is your ability to do any sort of... It is specifically your ability to do stunts in a vehicle under duress. Your ability to drive vehicles, everyone can naturally drive vehicles. But if you need to make a sweet jump off a ramp, if you need to do evasive maneuvers in your helicopter because there's an AA gun shooting at you, if you need to... I don't know. If you need to do something that... If you need to ride your bicycle away from across a crumbling bridge. These are all vehicles checks. I didn't give any particular one. And vehicles is typically going to be used if you're in a situation that requires a vehicle, crazy enough. If the players had a vehicle in mind, like in one of my previous GOPDs that I have recorded here, where they were going to the bayou and they said they wanted an airboat, the guy with the vehicles can do stunts in that airboat. So, we have the roles out of the way. That sounded like a whole lot of information, but once you get going, it's honestly going to be hard maybe the first time, maybe the first 2 times, but after that, this becomes a very easy system to work with. It is made purposely to be, take maybe an hour tops to learn, and then once you have it for good, and any roles are going to be very easy and straightforward. So, let's from here we can get into fluff. So the fluff for this system is this GOPD world. The members of your party are going to be members of the Global Organization for Paranormal Defense. This is a sort of middle ground of the Illuminati meets the Men in Black meets XCOM meets, I don't know, Overwatch. It is a situation where all of the most powerful nations have come together. Well, pretty much all the nations of the world have come together to form a secret organization dedicated to dealing with supernatural phenomena. And the reason for this is because GOPD is a scenario or a system or a lore world, whatever you want to call it, where everything goes. While magic, like powerful magic, is rare, it does exist. Aliens, they exist. Anything that like any of the like weird conspiracy theories, they're happening. The lizard people are trying to take over the White House. The Roswell was a cover-up. Like everything goes. Merlin, he was a sorcerer. He was a powerful wizard or whatever. There was a sword in the stone. You can get into it as far as you want, but the idea is that anything goes and everything does go. So things like faith-based things, they're a thing. Miracles are a thing. Demons exist, and because of this, the GOPD is a very, very busy organization. When they typically investigate a situation, first they will send out their first line of defense, which are the GOPD agents and mages. Typically their sort of front line, which are, I guess, you could call them scouts, I guess. This is what the players are going to typically play as. These scouts are going to be split into 3 classes, which are agents, mages. Okay, so let's write down here. So GOPD classes are going to be agents, mages, that bothers me, and relic users. Relic users are a wild card that I typically would not recommend using. Let's just kind of push them out of the way because I won't be talking about them much. They're for another time, really. Agents and mages are the important ones. So What's the difference between these two? As I said, the GOPD is an organization that recruits the best of the best from all over the world, but what the best of the best is might differ depending on what they do. While they will, for agents who represent the marshal or the gun-toting arm of the force, they will be recruiting from Olympians. They will be recruiting from MI6. They will be recruiting from the SAS, the Navy SEALs, the Rangers, Mossad, or however you say that, all of the, or Spetsnaz, or whatever, all of the most elite organizations. That's where these guys are recruited from. These represent the best of the best, and as such, when you're kitting them up, they are going to get their bonus, so to speak, is really that they get more ammo, and that is it. One thing that is important to note: there isn't a whole lot of difference between each of these classes because your class isn't quite as important as what you're doing, and the main difference is going to be agents get a hell of a lot more ammo, and mages can use magic. That may sound unbalanced, but this is a setting in which most people cannot, like, when you match up a wizard against a guy with a gun, the guy with the gun typically wins because unless the wizard is being possessed by a demon or made a pact with a powerful ancient eldritch being, most magic is slow and unwieldy, and honestly, you can screw up someone a lot more just shooting them with a 9mm once again, or an assault rifle. As an Illuminati-esque organization, this is an organization that is going to defy typical conventions. You can have people using flamethrowers and chemical weapons and all that stuff. I would tell your players to limit their use of these things because I have learned from experience that giving the players explosives tends to lead to very, very short and very anticlimactic sessions. So, they can use magic. So, what does magic in this setting consist of? It consists of spells that are going to be what the GOPD has decided are easy and effective. Because spells are not used as offensive tools in this setting, like this is a setting that is where I'm going to say specifically, do not, and I cannot emphasize this enough, do not have your players using magic as their main offensive tool. Magic should be a utility skill. It's not there for your line of defense unless it is particular to some sort of situation which you're using it in a utility fashion. There is a whole wide list of spells that I have come up with, but the idea is that when a mage goes into a mission, they are given 4 pre-selected spells for that mission. These are going to be spells that you give them and you assign for that mission, because they're going to be spells that are very important to that mission. So for an Antarctic setting, I might give them a spell that allows you to endure cold environments. I gave them for one that we did in the Antarctic, I gave them a spell for manipulating technology, which allowed you basically to bypass the typical technology roll and stuff like that, and perhaps lock or repair things instantly, and to sort of salvage computers and stuff like that. Light generation, which can generate lights up to the brightness of a flashbang if needed. Nice little thing for that. And another spell called Ocular Enhancement, which just gives them all sorts of different vision modes. This is the type of stuff that spells should be doing. I have a whole list of spells. If anyone ever wants more, send me a list. Send me a PM or whatever, and I can give you all sorts. I have made list upon list of these. But just remember, if you ever want to design your own, like some of these are things like water breathing, sonar, sticky, which just allows you to seal together 2 things with the force of strong glue. One of the strongest spells I've ever seen used because creative uses are powerful. Or mind wipe. Things like this. These spells are not for combat. If the player is particularly creative, they can use them in combat, but that is not their purpose. This is just a very important thing that I think should be noted at all times. I can't emphasize this enough. Players magic is not for killing. Or perhaps better, is not... Okay, well, I said that. Is not for fighting, really. And, like, this is because in situations like, you know, where you have wizards and stuff like that running around, it just... Honestly, it's not quite what I was looking for. And more importantly, I don't think it should be what... it's not what this setting's about, okay? So, that's why agents get more ammo, because, well... They get the firepower, they get the killing power, whereas a mage gets your utility. Relic users are wild cards, where they don't get magic or the bonus ammo of agents, but instead they will typically get some sort of... they will get a relic, which has some sort of miscellaneous function. A relic can be anything from something crazy like... let me see, some of my relics have been things like a hand axe that... will is almost unbreakable, and can, if thrown, it will return to the user. It can be a urn that contains a holy essence that anyone who drinks from it will have the evil sucked out of them. Or it could be the sword of a berserker, Chuchulain, and it makes you go bananas and fly to a Ryestrad, but you can't use any other weapons. Or it could be something like this paintbrush I came up with, that is a magical paintbrush. Anything drawn will manifest and become real, but the more time put into a painting, the more real the painting is. In other words, and the longer it will exist. In other words, putting time in will allow you to provide something that is more useful. It is not quite something like that paintbrush sounds incredibly overpowered. It is something very much to be to work with, to think about how you're going to do it. This is why I don't spend a lot of time on these relics and relic users, because relics and relic users are a very dangerous wild card that, if not handled properly, will either break your campaign or could be completely useless. Stay away from them unless you really are experienced or you want to do something particularly goofy or unusual. I also had such ideas as having someone who's just like a zombie, and that is their relic, quote unquote, is that they just are nearly impossible to kill. So perhaps they're just kind of goofy, but they aren't allowed to have weapons, because you don't give the zombie guy weapons because nobody really trusts him that much. All sorts of weird stuff like that. It's not something that's super important. So the most like attractive thing that I find in GOPD when players play it is that any weapon goes. When you are in this setting, because this is an international secret organization that has access to basically everything, the only real constraint on weaponry is where are you? Like, what year is it? So even then, what typically weaponry can be acquired from the way I describe it is it can be futuristic prototypes, and what that means is, let's just say you are in the year 2003, then perhaps you can bring weapons from as far forward in time as 3 years forward from there, so 2006, and say claim like 2006 being when the weapon came into like full use, and then hand wave it away as it was an experimental prototype of that weapon. The attractive nature of this is that people who are weapon fanatics, people who are gun nuts, will find all sorts of strange things, and as a DM, it is your job, unless it is completely outrageous, to say, you know what, sure, man. You want that Benilli 12 gauge, that very particular shotgun? Sure. Just keep in mind what different calibers of ammunition actually look like, and try and imagine what's different, the damage looks like on different calibers of ammunition. You don't have to put a lot of time into this, but the idea is that your players can bring whatever they want to the session, and you will typically just kind of roll with it. And you know, nothing is good, since nothing is hard statted. You just imagine, really. The DM's job in part is going to be, for whatever creature they have, to imagine what your gun does to what that player's gun is going to do when shot at that guy. If you want a good example of a game done in full, we have others on the channel that have been done, and you'll see exactly what I mean by this, where people are going to be bringing in all sorts of strange weapons, and it's the DM's job to sort of imagine what's the DC associated with using that weapon and what's the result of using that weapon. It's not something I can really tell you with a proper codified written rule, because it really depends on the person. And in the same way for magic, for mages, depending on, while all spells are possible, while all spells are unlimited use, different people use their spells in different ways. If you have a person who casts from a wizard spellbook, then then you should probably keep that in mind when they're casting spells, and might add a little bit of little tweaking to it versus someone who uses paper talismans. The difference being a player who uses paper talismans, when they cast a spell, you might say, okay, you have to put a talisman on this thing, and if the paper talisman on this, and if the paper talisman is removed, then the spell's broken. Whereas a magical book may have spells that are slower to cast, but can just be unleashed with great impunity. They might be a little more powerful than usual. They may be, they may have some sort of other, feature, but perhaps they always have to be spoken out loud, or perhaps they are super fast, like a wizard spell, but they all have to be shouted and they have a flourish associated with them. Perhaps it's a magic wand. This comes down to the player. This comes down to the DM. You two talk it out. Figure out what you're going to do there. And so, in terms of assigning spells, as I said, there was 4 pre-selected spells. What I forgot to say is that intellect does also sort of move into this, in that the number of spells a mage gets is as follows. It is 4 pre-selected spells in your mission, which are spells given by the DM, and then a number of extra spells that are taken, chosen by the player, which is equal to the player's intellect divided by 2, rounded up. So if the player has 3 intellect, they get 2 bonus spells, which are of their choosing. The nature of these spells can be spells from a list that the DM lists off, or it can be one of the player's creation. Just remember, DMs, to keep in mind how powerful spells can get, and don't limit, and just give them proper parameters when you are codifying spells. And if someone uses a spell in a GOPD session and you notice it is the most broken thing in existence, don't be afraid to nerf it for the next session. Since most of these characters will only be used in one mission, which is one session, because GOPD missions are by their nature one-shots. If something is too unbalanced in one session, don't be afraid to change it for the next session. That being said, additionally, what people are going to want to bring in explosives. They're going to want to bring in satchel charges, C4, and stuff like that. And what I will say is limit it. Limit it severely. For the love of God, limit it as much as you can, because explosives end people and end games. So, when we are getting into how much ammunition we have, there is a sort of dependency for what you're using. I have sort of a little code here set out, which is if someone wants a pistol, sure, you can have a pistol. Typically, I'd give them 4 clips, and if you are an agent, you get 4 more clips. If someone wants an SMG, sure, you can have your SMG. You get 3 clips, and you get 3 more if you're an agent. Assault rifles, 2 clips plus 2. Sniper should be 2 clips plus 2 again. Basically, an agent gets double the amount of ammunition that a regular person would get using that. And a person can ask for as many guns as they want. If the person wants to, they can keep asking for guns all day. But another part of the sort of more thematic, less mechanical version of this is that while there is no actual getting tongue-tied here, there is no actual encumbrance rules for this game. It is something that the DM should always keep in mind. And if your player decides that he is coming in with a duffel bag full of guns, punish him for it. If he wants to run around with that huge duffel bag full of guns, if he is trying to run away from danger, that bag of guns is going to slow him down. If your player comes in full plate, let them do it. But full plate is not easy to climb in. Full plate is not easy to run around in. It is hot. It is uncomfortable. And if you are in an environment where there's civilians are going to get really suspicious really fast. Because, once again, the GOPD is a setting in which magic is real, but civilians are not allowed to know it is real. Because the real secret of the GOPD universe is that anyone can do magic if they really know what they're doing. And that is the danger of it. And that is why it is so covert. This is why it is such a hush-hush issue. Because if civilians knew that they could do that, you'd have anarchy in the streets, and it would be an easy way for demons and bad things to get in. Just a little note here for agent stuff. I typically give them one light explosive, portable charges of any form, which could be a grenade, a flashbang, some sort of gas grenade, whatever. One base, and if you're an agent, you get 2 of the same kind. Don't give them more than that. In my experience, don't give them more than this. They will do terrible, terrible things to your session. So, there is also an idea of ammunition modifiers, because those exist in real life. Things like, if you want silvered bullets, what I do is I say a silvered bullet is, in this case, more of like a specifically, I call them like ideal weapon rounds, which is if you're fighting vampires, it's, maybe it's a blessed bullet. If you're fighting werewolves, it's silvered. If you are fighting aliens, perhaps there's a particular compound on the bullets that makes them better at killing aliens. I don't know. But if someone wants a clip of silvered bullets, reduce the clip size by 40%, rounded to the nearest. If someone, on the other hand, wants to use high explosive rounds, reduce the clip size by 60%. Once again, these are things to keep in mind when you're DMing. Keep it in mind as stuff that when the players ask for it, you say, sure, they can have this, because that's honestly half the fun of this, of GOPD, is players asking for ridiculous things and then getting the chance to use whatever ridiculous thing they want to bring. So once they have that stuff in mind, you can have at it. There are things that I added as my own particulars, as like, I always suggest people bring a med pack, because one of the other rules is whatever you bring is whatever you have. Do not let the players get away with, oh yeah, I totally had that in my backpack because I secretly said I did or something like that. No. If the players are bringing a flashlight, they tell you at the beginning they are bringing a flashlight, and then they bring the flashlight, and you can keep track of that. They don't just have a flashlight. Don't give people stuff without, them bringing it, because in that way, first off, you get the people more creative in thinking about the items they're bringing, and secondly, you get people a lot more creative in working with what they have. If nobody brought a flashlight and you're in a dark area, players might need to be a bit more creative. They might need to actually, deal with the fact that half the time they won't be able to see as well. It's these sort of restricted scenarios are honestly a lot more fun than just giving people a magical backpack full of whatever they want. And honestly, it's just something to keep in mind. So, in terms of our setting, we can move on from here a little bit. I'm not gonna go too far into spell lists or like special weapons, but I can give a little bit more background stuff for anyone who wants to write their own. So, the GOPD is like on purpose a very vague organization, because the big thing here is write what you want. Write any sort of situation. This is a system meant to be picked up, played with, and then you, after the end of the session, maybe it was a 5-hour session, listen to the one-shots video if you want a bit more on this. People put it down, they go, wow, that was a great session. It's all about memorable moments and people killing the shit out of some aliens or monsters or whatever, but in case you want some more concrete fluff, here we go. So the GOPD, once again, the Global Organization for Paranormal Defense, they have as an Illuminati type organization, or an organization that's kind of early on in its career consumed all the other secret organizations and became the biggest dog around. It started a little bit after the Second World War, and was officially started after the Second World War. in after dealing with Nazis using crazy Nazi magic, because Hitler was into that weird stuff. The Thule Society, it's a fun place to look as well. So in the modern setting, there are 5 tiers of clearance. Because the GOPD has facilities all over the world, you of course have to have regular civilians. These are tier 1 people. Tier 1s are people who don't understand the true nature of it, and they typically work for some sort of front organization. And this front organization will usually be, it might be a medical facility that, they don't actually know, they don't realize that this medical facility is actually built on top of a huge secret underground facility that houses all sorts of stuff. You could think of it like Resident Evil's Umbrella facilities or any of that stuff, where people may not understand what they are working for. They believe that they are working for something else. I've had it before where it's multinational research firms, where it's all a front though, and underneath is all the secret stuff. That's tier 2. Tier 2 are people who are aware of the true nature of GOPD and the full idea that magic is a thing, supernatural stuff is a thing. Tier 2 is where the scouts that most people are playing as will be in. Tier 2 people are just regular old humans. Perhaps they know a little bit of magic, and they are living in a world where they have that knowledge and have been recruited by the global Illuminati conspiracy that it exists to try and protect the Earth from dangers both within and without. Now, tier 3 is the next tier, of course, and tier 3 are people who have been, let's say, augmented. Tier 3 represent typically people who are used to guard the most secure areas. They are the super soldier types. They are the more powerful magical beings. Someone like the Pope would be a tier 3, because the Pope, as the direct mouthpiece of God in the Catholic faith, would clearly be a very, very powerful magic user who could cast all sorts of crazy miracles because, he's the Pope. I mean, you're not going to give the mouthpiece of God the ability to blow away Satan's minions? No. The Pope's a tough dude. He gives Satan the slam whenever Satan tries to get all uppity with him. And thus, the Pope would be tier 3. Tier 3 can also be cyborgs and all sorts of mutants and stuff like that. And speaking of which, when the GOPD sends people to investigate, typically the scouts will solve whatever issue it is. If there's a monster, they will solve it with either diplomacy or excessive firepower, but sometimes they fail. Sometimes people die, and thus we have Kill Team. Kill Team is the cleanup crew. They are the best of the best, the top, the most physically able and cybernetically and magically and genetically augmented individuals who are encased in big ass suits of combat armor that are known as Kill Team. The Kill Team power armors, which are these massive suits that are made actually off the old the concept of the old Jewish golem, which is that they are made with with just trace amounts of clay, I believe, from the River Jordan, which is where you need the clay to be from for golems. I don't remember, but the rest of it is, of course, combinations of bizarre alien steels along with Kevlar and titanium and all else. And the seal that is put into a golem, because a golem does not work without that scroll in its mouth. In this case, the mouth was put in a more defensible position, and a scroll was put in that says simply, "Do as I do." As such, a Kill Team operative who is encased in one of these power armors will find that their golem suit, which is their power armor suit, will move however they move. So basically, you are in a huge think Fallout, think think Halo, think any sort of setting where you have, or Warhammer, any sort of setting where you have people running around with big power armor suits that have all sorts of, kinetic batteries that charge as you move, or, sort of enhanced strength, minimize dexterity while minimizing dexterity losses, stronger, faster, able to jump, full story, built-in computer systems that feed in information to the user about life signs and provide users with useful information. These are the guys who run around with, big miniguns and blow things up. You can do kill team sessions. I've done them before. The way you do it is you typically give the players +6 to every stat, and then play the game as usual while also giving them access to, you want a minigun? Sure, take a minigun. You want a crazy plasma gun? Sure. I have a few sort of weapons that I've come up with, but a lot of it is what does the player want to do, because Kill Team is made to just wreck everything. Things like arm-mounted revolving autocannons that fire 20mm non-explosive shells, or someone wanted an upgrade of the UTS-15, the UTS-15, and I gave them the UT-2020, also known as the Dragon Slayer, which is a two-handed slug-firing shotgun that fires a tungsten slug made to crush scales and bones and meat and drop dragons. So it's the type of cannon that if a regular person were to fire, it would break their bones and probably kill them. However, it is also powerful enough that it can crush straight through a tank. So that's the level we're talking about. We're talking about, like, not quite 40k level, but some pretty big and pretty ridiculous level Warhammer 40k, sorry. Not some pretty ridiculous level stuff here. Or things like the Nova Bomb, which is a grenade-sized experimental device that simply destroys everything within a 10-foot sphere by shunting it off into another dimension, a dimensional space that is entirely consistent of energy. So you get a nice glassy sort of sphere of complete destruction, or the larger Nova, the larger full size, like that's the micro Nova Bomb, whereas the standard size Nova Bomb, which is a little bit larger, can take out several city blocks and just leave a massive crater. If Kill Team doesn't work, then typically the next option is tactical nukes. Just nuke it all, and it just makes some sort of cover story for it. Kill Team, if you do play them, give them power. Kill Team is a situation in which you want the players just destroying stuff. The only time you would give them like Kill Team from the beginning and not expect it to be a power fantasy is a situation in which you want a Warhammer 40k-esque huge big level fight between massive sides. You can have them on an alien planet with an army of these Kill Team types fighting off an alien invasion if you want, because that's the nature of it, is that because anything goes, you can make up all sorts of stories you want. So going back to the tiers though, so going past tier 3, this is where we get into. So let's make a list here. So yeah, tier 1. Not tier Q, works for cover organizations, and they are the civilians. So tier 1 are just civilians who work for GOPD, but they don't realize that they're working for the global Illuminati conspiracy. So tier 2 are scouts and people who kind of know what's going on, know about the truth, that hashtag truth. They're woke, to make a little joke of it. Tier 3 are the upgraded. So they're the upgraded best of the best. They represent the exemplaries of humanity, and they represent those who are this is the highest rank that you should ever have a players playing. There is a line here. There is only one situation, and this will come up in a bit. I will film a session of where the only time that someone will be playing something that could be called higher than tier 3, because tier 4 is where we get into where I would like to say is I'm just going to give them question mark, because tier 4, in my opinion, anything past tier 3 should be left intentionally as a mystery. Tier 4 represents people with higher echelon knowledge of the true meaning of the universe. These are people who may not work like regular humans. They are gods amongst men. They are people who just have, perhaps there's something wrong. They are an anomaly. They are a demigod. They simply walk between the planes. Things like Half-Life 2's and Half-Life 1's G-Man. Things like, I don't know. I honestly don't know, and that's exactly what I mean. The point of a tier 4 operative, like tier 4 is an acting tier technically, but a tier 4 should never be shown. Even if you have a giant kill team Superman who goes around blowing everything up with his super plasma cannons, he should still be tier 3, because a tier 4's existence should be a terrifying and alien concept. That is a transhuman existence that is just beyond mysterious. And then we have tier 5. Tier 5 are the administrators. Administrators, well, simply have the truth. They have the truth of the universe, whatever that may be. And because the nature of GOPD is so open-ended, an administrator's true intention should never be known. They may seem to be a regular person in a suit, perhaps a rather official-looking individual, but with a single phone call, entire countries will basically be at their mercy. They can call. These are the types that are the leaders of the Illuminati. These are the types that run the world. They are the global conspiracy of the hyper elite, the big ones. And that's, once again, while you can have an administrator mentioned, an administrator, in my opinion, is a better thing to use than a tier 4, because once again, tier 4s should be spooky, whereas tier 4 should be spooky and mysterious. A tier 5 should be someone who is simply, they are an administrator. That's the best way to describe it. They are someone very in the know. You can use them as a character only in passing, in my opinion. They should often be aloof and enigmatic, beyond danger, because they have these more eldritch, strange beings working for them, like the tier 4s. And once again, anything above tier 3 really should only exists because it needs just to answer the question if someone asks what is, like, who runs the GOPD. Well, that would be the administrators of tier 5. That's basically they exist as the answer to a question, and to be honest, they should not exist elsewise. To show something like that is to take away some of its mystery, some of its, in my opinion, some of its value. So it exists, there it is, and there's it. Honestly, that I'm just gonna do a quick search, but that's to be honest, that's most of what you need to know if you're going to run GOPD. From here, if you are looking for a place to move further on to get some ideas, things like my one shot, like the Hydra's Den we did on one shots, might be a nice place to go. Or perhaps go onto Netflix, or go down to a movie store, pick up some movies, get some ideas, and one day, take a couple of hours and say, hey guys, let's run the thing called GOPD, and just go for it. I put in the little I have a little note here that when you're counting, when people are firing, I completely forgot about combat. Combat is typically done in 5-second rounds. If you watch any of my GOPD things, you'll see exactly how this goes. For anything I might have missed, watch the GOPD video, and you'll just see it in action, because I might be missing something. I do combat rounds in 5-second intervals of everybody says what they do, and then I plan whatever the DM plans, whatever the enemies are doing, and then you have it all sort of play out. It's a very cinematic way of doing things. Everything sort of happens, and then you pause again and say, 5 seconds, what does everyone do? Then go, 5 seconds, what does everyone do? And you keep going like that. I have sort of rules here on how many shots typically a person will pull off when they're firing, because people are aiming when they fire their guns. A pistol is typically 2 to 4, or a magnum is 2 shots. An SMG is 3 to 5, depending. An assault rifle might be 3 to 5, depending. A sniper will typically be 1, and a shotgun will typically be 1. So, yeah, with that in mind, that is GOPD in a nutshell. That, I hope, answers most people's questions. People have been asking me, once again, what is GOPD? And here it is. I hope you guys run your own sessions. I would love to see more people run this, to be honest. If you need your a pre-made module, I'll probably get a few of those out at some point. But as it stands, this is all you need. You just need the will, the knowledge, and the way. If you are listening on YouTube, and you ever want to come in and play a session, because I run this for random people on on our server, click the link in the description. There's a link that should take you onto the Discord, or it should connect you to the Discord, and I'll run games. It's a fun time. I hope to see you if you can come here, and I hope everyone learned something today. Have some fun, and I hope you have a great Halloween.